The bitter wind howled across the Colorado plains as Tess Sullivan clutched her infant daughter closer to her chest, her thin shawl providing little protection against the unforgiving winter dawn. Her tears had frozen on her cheeks, and her fingers were numb from the cold, but she pressed on through the snow, desperate to find shelter before they both succumbed to the elements. Tess had fled in the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and her 3-month-old daughter, Clara. Her husband's lifeless body lay miles behind her, the victim of a brutal attack by the men he had foolishly gambled with. They had come to collect a debt, and when he couldn't pay, they had shown no mercy. Tess had hidden in the root cellar with Clara, muffling her baby's cries against her breast as the sounds of violence erupted above. When silence finally fell, she had emerged to find her world shattered. The attackers would return, she knew. They had seen Clara, and Tess had overheard enough to know they wouldn't leave a witness, no matter how young. So she had grabbed what little she could and fled into the night, hoping to reach the nearest town by morning. But the unexpected snowstorm had disoriented her, and now, as the first light of dawn broke over the eastern horizon, Tess realized with growing horror that she was lost. Clara had stopped crying hours ago, growing unnaturally quiet in her mother's arms, and that terrified Tess more than anything. "Please, God," she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. "Please help us." As if in answer to her prayer, she spotted the faint outline of a structure in the distance. Gathering the last of her strength, Tess stumbled forward, her legs heavy as lead, her vision blurring at the edges. The structure materialized into a small homestead, a modest cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, a barn, and a corral where horses stomped restlessly. Tess nearly wept with relief as she pushed herself toward the cabin door. She had barely enough strength to knock before her legs gave way beneath her. As she sank to her knees on the porch, Clara clutched tightly against her. The door swung open to reveal a tall man silhouetted against the warm light within. "Help," Tess managed to whisper before darkness claimed her. Tucker Ingram had been up since before dawn, stoking the fire and preparing for another day of work on his small ranch just outside Platteville, Colorado. The winter of 1876 had been brutal so far, and last night's snowstorm was just the latest challenge in a long line of hardships. Tucker had been on his own since returning from the war 11 years ago. At 32, he had built himself a modest spread, raising horses and cattle, keeping mostly to himself except for necessary trips into town for supplies. The solitary life suited him just fine, or so he told himself on the long, quiet evenings when the silence of his cabin seemed to press in around him. The knock at his door that morning came as a surprise. Few visitors braved the treacherous roads after a snowfall like the one they'd had. When he opened the door to find a young woman collapsing at his feet, an infant clutched in her arms, his instincts took over immediately. Tucker gathered the woman and child into his arms and carried them inside, kicking the door closed behind him. He laid the woman on his bed and quickly assessed the situation. The baby was worryingly cold and still, the mother barely conscious. Madam, can you hear me?" Tucker gently patted the woman's cheek, her eyes fluttered open, filled with panic. "Clara, my baby." "I've got her right here," Tucker assured her, carefully taking the infant from her arms. "Let me get her warmed up. You're both safe now." Tucker moved swiftly to the fireplace, unwrapping the layers of thin blankets around the baby. The little girl was pale, her lips tinged with blue, but he could see the faint rise and fall of her chest. Knowing what needed to be done, Tucker unbuttoned his shirt and placed the infant directly against his skin. "We keep each other warm," he murmured to the child as he wrapped his shirt and then a thick blanket around them both. "That's what folks do out here. We keep each other warm." The baby stirred slightly against his chest, a good sign. Tucker moved back to check on the mother, who was trying to sit up despite her exhaustion. "My baby," she repeated, her voice hoarse with fear. "She's right here," Tucker said, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "She's warming up. You both need to get warm and then have something to eat." Relief flooded the woman's face as she saw her child nestled safely against Tucker's chest. "Thank you," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you." "What's your name, madam?" Tucker asked gently. Tess Sullivan, and that's Clara." "I'm Thomas Ingram, but folks call me Tucker." "You're safe here, Mrs. Sullivan. Rest now, and we'll talk when you've had a chance to recover." Tess nodded weakly, her eyes already drifting closed as exhaustion claimed her once more. Tucker sat with the baby for nearly an hour, feeling the small body gradually grow warmer against his skin. When Clara began to squirm and make small, mewling noises, he knew she was out of immediate danger. Tucker's experience with babies was limited to say the least, but he'd helped deliver foals and calves, and the principle seemed similar: keep them warm, make sure they were feeding properly, and watch for signs of distress. He placed a pot of broth on the stove to heat, and then gently woke Tess. "Mrs. Sullivan, your little one seems to be waking up. I reckon she might be hungry." Tess's eyes opened immediately, maternal instinct overriding her exhaustion. She sat up, wincing slightly, and reached for her daughter. Tucker carefully transferred the baby to her mother's arms, turning away to give Tess privacy as she adjusted her clothing to feed Clara. "I've got some broth heating up for you," Tucker said, keeping his back turned. "And I'll need to check on my livestock, but I'll be quick about it." "Mr. Ingram," Tess called as he headed for the door. "Thank you. We would have died out there without you." Tucker nodded awkwardly, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Just doing what anyone would do, madam. I'll be back shortly." Outside, Tucker trudged through the snow to the barn, his mind racing. What was a young woman with an infant doing traveling alone in this weather? She was clearly running from something or someone. The thin gold band on her finger indicated she was married, but there was no sign of a husband. Had she been widowed? Abandoned? Or was she fleeing from her husband? It wasn't his business, Tucker reminded himself as he fed the horses and checked on his small herd of cattle in the nearby shelter. But he couldn't deny the protective instinct that had surged through him when he'd held that tiny baby against his chest. Whatever trouble Tess Sullivan was in, Tucker found himself determined to help. By the time he returned to the cabin, Tess had finished feeding Clara and had managed to get to her feet, though she swayed slightly with weakness. "You should be resting," Tucker said, quickly crossing to steady her. "I've imposed enough," Tess replied. "I need to get to town. In this weather." "With a baby, not today you don't." Tucker's tone was firm but gentle. "The road to Platteville will be near impassable until the snow starts to melt. Even then, it's 5 miles and you're in no condition to make that journey." Tess bit her lip, anxiety evident in her expression. "We can't stay." "It's not safe." Tucker guided her back to the bed. "Whatever you're running from, it won't find you today, not in this snow. Sit, eat, and if you feel up to it, you can tell me what kind of trouble you're in. Or don't. But either way, you and your daughter are staying put until it's safe to travel." Tess relented, accepting the bowl of broth Tucker offered. As she ate, color gradually returned to her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes softened slightly. "My husband is dead," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "Men came to our homestead yesterday. William owed them money from gambling. They killed him, and they'll kill us too if they find us. I heard them say so." Tucker's jaw tightened at the matter-of-fact way she related such horror. "Do you know who these men were?" Tess shook her head. "I only caught a glimpse, 3 of them. One had a scar across his cheek. They called him Butcher. Tucker's blood ran cold. The Butcher was Jacob Reeves, a notorious outlaw who operated throughout the Colorado Territory with his gang. They were known for their brutality and for always finishing what they started. "You did right to run," Tucker said, careful to keep his voice steady despite the dread filling him. "But Platteville might not be far enough. Reeves and his men frequent the saloon there." Tess's face drained of color. "Where can we go, then? I have no money, no family closer than St. Louis." Tucker considered the options. It was a day's ride to Denver, where there was a proper sheriff's office that might offer protection. But traveling with an infant in winter was risky, and if Reeves was looking for them. "You'll stay here until we figure something out," Tucker decided. "My place is off the main road. Few people know it's here, and those who do have no reason to mention it to the likes of Jacob Reeves." "I can't ask that of you," Tess protested. "You've already done so much, and I've brought danger to your door." Tucker shrugged. "Danger and I are old acquaintances, Mrs. Sullivan. Besides, that little one deserves a fighting chance." He nodded toward Clara, who had fallen asleep in Tess's arms. "And I've got a spare room that's hardly used. It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need it." Tess studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Ingram. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Tucker," he corrected her, "and there's no debt between us. Like I told your daughter when we were getting acquainted out here, we keep each other warm. It's the only way to survive." As Tucker prepared the spare room for Tess and Clara, he tried to ignore the voice in his head telling him he was making a grave mistake. Jacob Reeves wasn't a man who gave up easily, and harboring his targets was tantamount to signing his own death warrant. Yet as he glanced back at the young mother cradling her sleeping infant by his fire, Tucker knew he couldn't turn them away. For the first time in years, his solitary cabin felt like something more than just a place to sleep. It felt like a home worth protecting. The next few days fell into an unexpected pattern of domesticity that Tucker hadn't experienced since before the war. Tess, despite his protests that she should rest, insisted on earning her keep. She cooked meals that tasted far better than Tucker's utilitarian fare, mended clothes that he had planned to discard, and brought a warmth to the cabin that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. Clara, for her part, seemed to have taken a liking to Tucker. The infant's eyes would follow him around the room, and when he spoke, she would often respond with happy gurgles and waving fists. Tucker found himself talking to her as he went about his chores inside, narrating the most mundane tasks as if they were the most fascinating stories ever told. "And this here's where I keep the coffee beans," he explained one morning as Tess looked on with amusement. "Good coffee's important out here, isn't it, little miss? Gets a man through the cold mornings." "She's quite taken with you," Tess observed, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was the first genuine smile Tucker had seen from her, and it transformed her face, highlighting the delicate features that worry and fear had obscured. Tucker felt his cheeks warm. "Just being friendly is all. Babies need talking to, so I hear." "They do," Tess agreed. "William never had much time for it. Said babies couldn't understand anyway, so what was the point?" Her smile faltered at the mention of her late husband. Tucker hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind. "Was he good to you? William, I mean." Tess busied herself with adjusting Clara's blanket. "He provided for us, or tried to. The farming didn't go well, and then the gambling." She trailed off. "That's not what I asked," Tucker said gently. Tess met his eyes briefly, then looked away. "He had a temper, especially when he drank. But he never hurt Clara." The implication hung in the air between them. Tucker felt a surge of anger toward a man he had never met, followed quickly by guilt for judging someone who was no longer alive to defend himself. "I'm sorry," Tucker said. "That was out of line. It's not my place to ask such things." "No," Tess replied quietly, "but I appreciate that you care enough to ask." The conversation might have continued, but a sound outside caught Tucker's attention, the distant approach of hooves crunching through snow. Tess froze, her eyes wide with fear. "Take Clara to the back room," Tucker instructed calmly, moving to retrieve his rifle from beside the door. "Stay there and keep quiet, no matter what you hear." Tess nodded, gathering Clara into her arms and disappearing into the spare bedroom as Tucker positioned himself near the window, careful to remain out of sight while maintaining a view of the approaching rider. Relief washed over him as he recognized the distinctive hat and coat of Sheriff Daniel Parker from Platteville. Tucker set his rifle aside and opened the door as the lawman dismounted. "Morning, Tucker," Sheriff Parker called, stamping snow from his boots before ascending the porch steps. "Quite a ride out here in this weather." "What brings you all this way, Sheriff?" Tucker asked, keeping his tone casual despite the tension coiling in his stomach. "Trouble, I'm afraid." Parker sighed, removing his hat as he entered the cabin. "Had some men in town asking questions. Looking for a woman and a baby." Tucker kept his expression neutral. "That's so. Parker nodded, warming his hands by the fire. "Claim she's the wife of a friend of theirs who died suddenly. Say they promised to look after her, bring her back to her family." The sheriff's shrewd eyes swept the cabin. "One of them's got a nasty scar on his face. Goes by the name of Reeves." Tucker's blood ran cold, but he maintained his composure. "Haven't seen any woman or baby around here. Been pretty quiet since the storm." Parker studied him for a long moment. "That's what I figured, but I thought you should know they're asking around, even offered a reward for information." He replaced his hat. "These don't strike me as men with good intentions, Tucker. If you do happen to come across this woman and child, you might want to steer clear of Platteville for a while." The message was clear. The sheriff suspected or knew that Tess and Clara were here, but was deliberately avoiding confirming it. Tucker nodded slowly. "Appreciate the warning, Sheriff. I'll keep an eye out." Parker turned to leave but paused at the door. "One more thing. I sent a telegram to the marshal's office in Denver about these men. Something about them didn't sit right. Got a reply this morning." He lowered his voice. "Jacob Reeves is wanted for murder in 3 territories. Him and his gang, so if you were harboring any notions about confronting them." He let the sentence hang. "I'm not looking for trouble," Tucker assured him, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Tucker had never been one to back down from a fight, especially when it came to protecting the innocent. After the sheriff departed, Tucker waited until his horse was well out of sight before going to the spare room. He found Tess sitting on the edge of the bed, Clara clutched tightly to her chest, her face pale with fear. "It was the sheriff," Tucker explained. "He came to warn us. Reeves and his men are in Platteville looking for you." Tess's eyes filled with tears. "They'll never stop, will they?" "How did they even know which way I went?" "The storm would have covered your tracks," Tucker reasoned, "but they probably figured you'd head for the nearest town. It was just bad luck." He sat beside her on the bed, careful to keep a respectful distance. "The sheriff knows you're here, or at least suspects, but he's not going to tell them. He also mentioned that Reeves is wanted for murder. The law's after him too." "But not here," Tess said bitterly. "Not now." "No," Tucker admitted. "Not yet, but the sheriff's contacted Denver. Help will come, but it might take time." He hesitated before adding, "We need to be prepared in case Reeves figures out you're here before that happens." Tess looked up at him, her vulnerability giving way to a steely determination that took Tucker by surprise. "I won't let them hurt Clara. Or you." "I can use a gun if I need to." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "That a fact my father taught me before I married William." Her chin lifted slightly. "I'm a good shot, Mr. Ingram." "Tucker," he reminded her with a small smile, "and I believe you, but let's hope it doesn't come to that." He stood, his mind racing through possibilities. "We need a plan, somewhere you and Clara can hide if trouble comes calling." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Tucker showed Tess a small cellar beneath a trapdoor in the pantry floor, a place he used for storing root vegetables and preserves during the winter. "It's not comfortable," he apologized, "but it's well hidden. If anyone comes, you take Clara down there and stay quiet. I've left water, some food, and extra blankets." Tess nodded, memorizing the location and the mechanism of the trapdoor. "What about you? You can't face them alone." "I won't engage unless I have to," Tucker promised, though they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. "The important thing is keeping you and Clara safe." That night, after Tess had put Clara down to sleep, she joined Tucker by the fire. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling of the flames the only sound in the cabin. Tucker was acutely aware of her presence beside him, the subtle scent of the lavender soap she had used to wash her hair, the graceful movement of her hands as she worked on mending one of his shirts. "Tell me about yourself," Tess said suddenly, her voice soft in the dim light. "I know almost nothing about the man who saved our lives." Tucker shifted uncomfortably. "Not much to tell. Born in Pennsylvania, fought in the war, came west afterward looking for a fresh start." "That's hardly nothing," Tess countered. "Which side did you fight for?" "Union," Tucker replied. "Though I had friends who wore gray. War's a strange thing, makes enemies of men who might otherwise share a drink and a laugh." Tess studied him thoughtfully. "You were young. 17 when I enlisted, 21 when it ended." Tucker's gaze fixed on the flames, memories he usually kept buried rising to the surface. "Felt a lot older, though. And you came here alone, no family?" Tucker shook his head. "Parents died before the war, no siblings. There was a girl once back home, but—" He trailed off, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "She didn't wait," Tess guessed. "Can't blame her," Tucker said with a shrug that didn't quite disguise the old hurt. 4 years is a long time, and the man who came back wasn't the boy who left." He cleared his throat. "What about you? You mentioned family in St. Louis." "My parents," Tess confirmed, "and a younger sister. They didn't approve of William, said he was unstable, too quick to anger." She smiled sadly. "They were right, of course, but I was young and thought I knew better. We eloped, and I haven't seen them since." 3 years ago," Tess nodded. "I was 18, so foolish." "Just hopeful," Tucker corrected her gently. "There's no shame in that." Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Tucker felt something shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had been there all along but neither had acknowledged. Tess looked away first, her cheeks coloring slightly. "It's late," she said, setting aside the mending. "I should check on Clara." Tucker nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the end of their conversation. "Of course. Good night, Mrs. Sullivan." "Tess," she corrected him with a small smile. "If I'm to call you Tucker, then you must call me Tess." "Good night, Tess," Tucker amended, watching as she disappeared into the spare room, taking the strange warmth in his chest with her. For several days, life continued in this manner, a fragile peace punctuated by moments of connection that grew more frequent as Tess and Tucker became accustomed to each other's presence. Tucker found himself looking forward to their conversations by the fire each evening, learning about Tess's life before William, her dreams of someday opening a small dressmaking shop. In turn, he shared stories of his travels after the war, the odd jobs he had taken before settling in Colorado, and his plans for expanding his modest ranch. Clara thrived under their joint care, her cheeks filling out, her small body growing stronger each day. She had begun to recognize Tucker's voice, turning her head when he entered a room, reaching for him with tiny hands when he came close. The first time she had smiled at him, a toothless, drooling grin that nevertheless lit up her entire face, Tucker had felt something crack open inside his chest, a place he had thought long sealed shut. It was on the 7th day of their stay that Tucker, returning from checking his fence line, noticed fresh tracks in the snow leading toward his property, 3 sets of horseshoes, heading in the direction of his cabin. His heart hammered against his ribs as he urged his horse forward, praying he wasn't too late. The cabin came into view, apparently undisturbed, no horses tied outside. Tucker approached cautiously, rifle at the ready, ears straining for any sound. The tracks veered off before reaching his property, heading toward the creek that marked his eastern boundary. Relief flooded through him, followed quickly by concern. They were scouting the area. Inside, Tucker found Tess at the stove, Clara napping in a makeshift cradle nearby. The normalcy of the scene struck him forcefully, how quickly he had grown accustomed to coming home to them, how empty the cabin would feel when they were gone. "We had visitors," Tucker said without preamble, setting his rifle aside. "They didn't come to the cabin, but they were close." Checking the area. The wooden spoon Tess had been holding clattered to the floor. How many? 3, judging by the tracks. Could be Reeves and his men, could be someone else. Either way, we need to be ready. Tess nodded, her face pale but composed. "What do we do?" "We wait," Tucker said grimly. "And we prepare for the worst." That night, after securing the cabin as best he could, Tucker sat with his rifle across his lap, keeping watch by the window. Tess joined him after putting Clara down, her own determination evident in the set of her jaw. "You should get some rest," Tucker told her. "I'll wake you if anything happens." Tess shook her head. "I wouldn't be able to sleep anyway." She hesitated, then added in a rush, "I've been thinking. If something happens to me, don't," Tucker interrupted. "Nothing's going to happen to you." "Please, let me finish." Tess's voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "If something happens to me, I want you to take Clara to my parents in St. Louis. They live on Olive Street near the Mercantile. Their names are Henry and Margaret Simmons." She reached for his hand, her fingers cold against his skin. "Promise me, Tucker. Promise me she'll be safe." Tucker curled his fingers around hers, squeezing gently. "I promise. But it won't come to that. We're going to get through this, all 3 of us." Tess smiled faintly, but her eyes remained troubled. They sat in silence for a while, hands still joined, each lost in their own thoughts. When Tess finally spoke again, her voice was so quiet Tucker had to lean closer to hear. "I'm afraid all the time," she confessed. "For Clara, for myself. But when I'm with you, the fear is less. You make me feel safe, Tucker, not just protected, but safe in a way I haven't felt in years." The simple honesty of her words struck Tucker deeply. "I've been alone a long time," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Convinced myself that's how I wanted it, but having you and Clara here." He struggled to find the right words. "It feels right. Like maybe all this time I was just waiting for something I didn't know I needed." Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the unspoken feelings between them crystallized into a sudden, undeniable clarity. Tucker leaned forward slowly, giving Tess every chance to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened with a surprising intensity. When they finally drew apart, both slightly breathless, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "I shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "You're still grieving, and there's so much uncertainty ahead." Tess placed her fingers against his lips, silencing him. "I'm not grieving William," she said softly. "I'm grieving the life I thought I would have, the person I thought I was marrying, but that grief began long before he died." She drew back slightly, meeting his gaze steadily. What I feel for you is different than anything I've felt before. It scares me how quickly it happened, but it doesn't make it any less real." Tucker brushed a strand of hair from her face, marveling at the courage of this woman who had endured so much yet remained so open to possibility. "If we make it through this," he said, "if Reeves and his men are caught or move on, what then?" "I don't know," Tess admitted. "I should take Clara to my parents, I suppose, try to rebuild our lives." The thought of them leaving sent a pang through Tucker's chest, but he nodded. "Of course, that's what's best for Clara." Tess searched his face. "And what about what's best for me? For you?" Before Tucker could respond, a faint noise outside caught his attention, the soft nicker of a horse being quieted, the crunch of snow under boots. He was on his feet immediately, rifle in hand. "They're here," he whispered, heart pounding. "Get Clara and go to the cellar. Now." Tess moved swiftly, disappearing into the bedroom and returning moments later with a bundled Clara in her arms. Tucker helped her lift the trapdoor in the pantry floor, his stomach twisting at the thought of her, and the baby huddled in the dark while he faced what was coming. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear," he instructed, passing her a small pistol. "Use this only if they find you. Last resort." Tess took the gun with a steady hand, then surprised him by rising on her toes to press a fierce kiss to his lips. "Be careful," she whispered. "Come back to us." With that, she descended into the cellar, Clara clutched protectively to her chest. Tucker lowered the trapdoor and covered it with the small rug that usually lay there, then positioned himself near the window, extinguishing the lamp to leave the cabin in darkness, save for the dim glow of the dying fire. He didn't have long to wait. The door burst open with a crack of splintering wood, and 3 men entered, guns drawn. Tucker recognized Jacob Reeves immediately from the sheriff's description, a tall, lean man with a jagged scar running from his left eye to the corner of his mouth. His companions were equally menacing, one broad-shouldered and bearded, the other whipcord thin with eyes that darted nervously around the cabin. "Evening, gentlemen," Tucker said calmly, his rifle trained on Reeves. "You're trespassing on private property." Reeves smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "Now that's not very hospitable. We're just looking for a friend of ours, a young widow and her baby. Heard they might be in these parts." "Haven't seen any woman or child," Tucker replied evenly. "Just me here." The bearded man snorted in disbelief. "Then why's there a cradle by the fire? And women's things hanging to dry?" He gestured to the small items of Clara's clothing that Tess had washed earlier that day. Tucker silently cursed his oversight. "Had visitors earlier. Friend from town with her baby. They left before sundown. Is that right?" Reeves's voice was deceptively soft as he advanced further into the cabin. "Funny, we've been watching this place since midday. Didn't see anyone leave." Tucker's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then you weren't watching close enough." "Search the place," Reeves ordered his men, his eyes never leaving Tucker. "Every corner." The bearded man and his nervous companion began methodically checking the cabin, opening cupboards, looking under the bed, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. Tucker kept his rifle trained on Reeves, knowing he was the greatest threat. "What's your interest in this woman anyway?" Tucker asked, trying to keep their attention away from the pantry. "If she's widowed, surely she's suffered enough." Reeves chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Let's just say her husband owed us something valuable, and now that debt falls to her. Business is business." "Sounds more like murder is your business," Tucker replied coldly. "The law knows you're here, Reeves. Sheriff Parker sent word to Denver. Marshals will be here any day." A flicker of surprise crossed Reeves's scarred face, quickly masked. "You seem to know a lot for a man who claims not to have seen the woman we're looking for." "News travels," Tucker said with a shrug, "and your reputation precedes you." The bearded man emerged from the spare room. "Nothing there, boss. But someone's been staying in that room. Bed's been slept in." "What about the rest of the house?" Reeves demanded. "Just the kitchen left," the nervous man replied, heading toward the pantry. Tucker's heart hammered in his chest as the man approached the hidden trapdoor. He had to make a move now or risk Tess and Clara being discovered. "That's far enough," Tucker said, shifting his aim slightly. "You've searched my home without permission. Now it's time for you to leave," Reeves laughed. "Or what, you'll shoot all three of us? I don't think so." He nodded to the nervous man. "Keep looking." The moment the man turned back toward the pantry, Tucker made his decision. He fired, the shot deliberately wide but close enough to send the man diving for cover. In the ensuing chaos, Tucker rolled behind an overturned table as Reeves and the bearded man returned fire. The cabin filled with gunsmoke and the deafening report of multiple firearms. Tucker managed to wing the bearded man in the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward with a howl of pain. But Reeves was a skilled gunman, his shots coming perilously close to Tucker's position. "You're dead, mister," Reeves shouted over the gunfire. "And when we're done with you, we'll find that woman and her brat." Tucker's blood boiled at the threat. He waited for a pause in the shooting, then rose quickly, firing twice in rapid succession. The first shot went wide, but the second caught Reeves in the side, spinning him around with the impact. The outlaw dropped to one knee, his face contorted with pain and rage. Before Tucker could press his advantage, the nervous man flanked him, firing from the side. Tucker felt a searing pain across his upper arm as the bullet grazed him, tearing through sleeve and skin alike. He staggered, momentarily disoriented by the shock and pain. Reeves seized the opportunity, surging to his feet despite his wound and charging toward Tucker with a roar of fury. They collided violently, Reeves's momentum carrying them both to the floor. Tucker's rifle was knocked from his hands, skittering across the wooden planks out of reach. They grappled fiercely, each man fighting for dominance. Reeves was strong despite his wound, his face twisted with hatred as he slammed a fist into Tucker's jaw. Tucker responded with a powerful strike to Reeves's injured side, eliciting a howl of pain from the outlaw. Out of the corner of his eye, Tucker saw the bearded man struggling to aim his pistol with his uninjured arm, trying to get a clear shot at Tucker without hitting his boss. The nervous man had disappeared from view heading toward the pantry. Tucker realized with a surge of dread. With renewed desperation, Tucker managed to flip Reeves onto his back, pinning him momentarily. He reached for the knife at his belt, but Reeves was quicker, producing a blade of his own that flashed in the firelight as it arced toward Tucker's throat. Tucker caught Reeves's wrist at the last moment, the blade hovering inches from his neck as they struggled for control. Slowly, inexorably, the knife began to descend, Reeves's greater weight and leverage giving him the advantage. Just as the cold steel touched Tucker's skin, a gunshot rang out not from the bearded man's pistol, but from the direction of the pantry. The nervous man screamed, a high, thin sound of pain and shock. There was a thud as his body hit the floor. The distraction was all Tucker needed. He slammed his forehead into Reeves's face, feeling the satisfying crunch of cartilage as the outlaw's nose broke. Reeves reeled backward, losing his grip on the knife. Tucker seized it and in one fluid motion, plunged it into Reeves's shoulder. The outlaw howled, more in rage than pain, but before he could retaliate, another shot rang out. The bearded man dropped his pistol, clutching his chest, confusion replacing the anger on his face as he toppled forward. Tucker rolled away from Reeves, scrambling for his rifle. He seized it just as Reeves lunged for his fallen pistol. They faced each other across the wreckage of the cabin, both wounded, both deadly determined. "It's over, Reeves," Tucker panted, his rifle unwavering despite the pain in his arm. "Your men are down, you're wounded. Surrender now, and you might live to see a trial." Reeves spat blood onto the floor. "I don't surrender," he snarled, raising his pistol. Two shots rang out simultaneously, Tucker's rifle and another from behind him. Reeves jerked twice, his pistol firing harmlessly into the ceiling as he collapsed backward, eyes wide with shock and then empty in death. Tucker turned to find Tess standing in the pantry doorway, the small pistol he had given her still raised, her face pale but determined. Behind her, the nervous man lay crumpled on the floor of the pantry, a spreading stain of crimson on his chest. "Clara?" Tucker asked urgently, wincing as he got to his feet. "Still in the cellar," Tess replied, lowering the gun with a hand that finally began to shake. "I heard them coming in when this one found the trapdoor." Her voice faltered. Tucker crossed to her in 3 strides, pulling her against him with his uninjured arm. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now. You did what you had to do." Tess trembled against him, the delayed shock of the violence setting in. "I killed a man," she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. "You protected your child," Tucker corrected her gently, "and probably saved my life." He drew back slightly, examining her face. "Are you hurt?" Tess shook her head, her eyes drawn to the bloody tear in his sleeve. "But you are. Let me get Clara and then I'll tend to that wound." While Tess retrieved Clara from the cellar, Tucker checked each of the fallen men, confirming what he already knew: all 3 were dead. The nervous man had died instantly from Tess's shot. The bearded man from a bullet to the heart that Tucker realized must have come from outside, and Reeves from the combined effect of Tucker's shot, and another that had entered through the back of his skull. Tucker moved to the shattered door, rifle ready, uncertain if more of Reeves's gang might be lurking outside. Instead, he found Sheriff Parker dismounting from his horse, a smoking rifle in hand. "Looks like I arrived just in time," the sheriff observed, taking in Tucker's bloody appearance. "You all right, son?" "I'll live," Tucker replied, lowering his rifle with relief. "How did you know?" Parker gestured toward the road. "Spotted these 3 heading this way earlier today. Figured I should check in, make sure everything was all right. Heard the shooting from down the road." He glanced past Tucker at the bodies inside the cabin. "Reeves?" Tucker nodded. "Him and 2 others. They found us." "Found who?" Parker asked innocently, though his knowing expression belied the question. Before Tucker could respond, Tess appeared behind him, Clara clutched tightly to her chest. The baby was remarkably calm despite the chaos, her wide eyes taking in the destruction of the cabin with innocent curiosity. "Madam," Parker acknowledged with a tip of his hat. "Glad to see you and the little one are unharmed." Tess nodded, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "Thanks to Mr. Ingram and your timely arrival, Sheriff." "Well," Parker sighed, surveying the scene, "this is quite a mess, but I can't say I'm sorry to see Jacob Reeves meet his end. He's been terrorizing these parts for too long." He fixed Tucker with a stern look. "I'll need statements from both of you, but that can wait until morning. For now, let's get this place secured and those wounds tended to." With the sheriff's help, they moved the bodies to the barn for the night. They would be taken to Platteville the next day for official identification and burial. Tucker's wound proved to be superficial, a deep graze that Tess cleaned and bandaged with gentle hands, her touch sending currents of warmth through him despite the sting of the antiseptic. Sheriff Parker, after helping to board up the broken door, declined Tucker's offer to stay the night. "Got to get back to town and send a telegram to Denver," he explained. "Let them know Reeves and his men won't be causing any more trouble." He tipped his hat to Tess. "Madam, Whatever brought you to Tucker's door, I'd say you found the right place. Not many men would stand against Jacob Reeves for a stranger. After the sheriff departed, Tess put Clara down to sleep in her cradle, which had miraculously survived the gunfight unscathed. Tucker busied himself cleaning up the worst of the destruction, though much of the furniture was beyond repair, and bullet holes riddled the walls. "It's ruined," Tess said quietly, surveying the damage to the cabin that had become their sanctuary. "Just wood and furnishings," Tucker replied, wincing as he lifted a shattered chair. "Can be rebuilt." Tess moved to take the chair from him, her hand brushing his. "You should rest. That arm needs time to heal." Tucker relinquished the chair but caught her hand in his. "What you did tonight," he began. "Don't," Tess interrupted, her eyes downcast. "I can't think about it yet." Tucker gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "What I was going to say is that you were incredibly brave and strong, just like I knew you would be." Tears welled in Tess's eyes, the events of the night finally overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Not of dying, but of Clara growing up without anyone to love her, of never seeing you again." Tucker drew her into his arms, mindful of his injury, and held her as the tears came in earnest, her body shaking with silent sobs. He murmured reassurances into her hair, promising safety, promising tomorrow, promising that the worst was behind them now. When her tears subsided, Tess drew back slightly, her face inches from his. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing their earlier conversation as if the gunfight had been merely a violent interlude. Tucker's response was interrupted by Clara's fussing from her cradle. Tess moved to attend to her daughter, leaving Tucker's question unanswered for the moment. He watched as she lifted Clara, soothing her with soft words and gentle rocking. The sight stirred something profound in Tucker's chest, a yearning for things he had long ago convinced himself he didn't need or want. "She's hungry," Tess explained, settling into the one unbroken chair near the fire. "It will take a few minutes." Tucker nodded, turning away to give her privacy. "I'll check the perimeter, make sure everything's secure." Outside, the night was still and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. Tucker stood on his porch, breathing in the crisp air, trying to clear his head. The events of the night replayed in his mind: the fight, the killing, the moment he thought he might die. But most of all, he thought about Tess standing in the pantry doorway, gun in hand, having made the hardest choice a person could make to protect her child, and him. She had protected him too. When he returned to the cabin, Tess had put Clara back down and was attempting to straighten the room, her movements slow with exhaustion. "Leave it," Tucker told her gently. "Nothing that can't wait till morning." Tess nodded, swaying slightly on her feet. Tucker guided her to the bed in the spare room, which had escaped the worst of the destruction. "Rest," he urged. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," Tess protested, though her eyes were already closing. Tucker smiled. "I'll rest in the chair, too wound up to sleep anyway." But as he turned to leave, Tess caught his hand. "Stay," she whispered. "Please, just stay with me." The simple request, laden with trust and vulnerability, undid him completely. Tucker hesitated only briefly before stretching out beside her on the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Tess immediately curled into him, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "I meant what I said before," she murmured, her voice thick with approaching sleep. "You make me feel safe." Tucker pressed a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Sleep now," he whispered. "I've got you." As Tess's breathing deepened into sleep, Tucker lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities. The danger had passed. Reeves was dead, his gang scattered or soon to be rounded up by the law. Tess and Clara were safe. She could go to her parents in St. Louis as planned, rebuild her life far from the memories of William and the violence that had followed. The thought of them leaving created a hollow ache in Tucker's chest. In just a week, they had become essential to him, transforming his solitary existence into something rich with purpose and feeling. The idea of returning to his former life, the empty cabin, the silent meals, the long nights alone, was suddenly unbearable. But Tucker knew better than to build dreams on the shaky foundation of shared danger and heightened emotions. Whatever Tess felt for him now might not survive the return to normal life, the practical considerations of raising a child, the memories of the violence they had endured together. He would offer her the choice, he decided. No pressure, no expectations. If she chose to go, he would wish her well and hold the memory of these days close. And if she chose to stay... Tucker closed his eyes, allowing himself, just for a moment, to imagine a future with Tess and Clara by his side, a family, a home, a life built on mutual respect and growing love. It was more than he had ever dared to hope for, yet suddenly it seemed within reach. With that thought warming him from within, Tucker finally drifted into a dreamless sleep, his arm secure around Tess, her steady heartbeat against his side, the most profound comfort he had ever known. Morning arrived with pale sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the destruction of the cabin in stark detail. Tucker woke to find Tess already up, moving quietly around the kitchen as she prepared a simple breakfast, Clara cooing contentedly in her cradle nearby. "You should have woken me," Tucker said, sitting up with a wince as his injured arm protested the movement. Tess glanced over with a small smile. "You needed the rest." She brought him a cup of coffee, her fingers brushing his as she handed it over. "How's the arm?" "Sore, but it'll heal," Tucker replied, taking a grateful sip of the hot liquid. "You sleep all right?" Tess nodded, though the shadows under her eyes suggested otherwise. "No dreams, at least. That's something." They sat in companionable silence for a while, sharing the simple breakfast of biscuits and preserves, the events of the previous night hanging between them, acknowledged but not discussed. It wasn't until Clara began to fuss that Tess finally broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Sheriff Parker will be back today for our statements," she said, lifting Clara into her arms. "After that, I suppose I should think about what comes next." Tucker set down his coffee cup, steeling himself for the conversation he had been rehearsing in his mind. "You mentioned going to your parents in St. Louis." "Yes," Tess agreed, her expression unreadable. "That would be the sensible thing to do. Clara should know her grandparents and they would help us get established." "Of course," Tucker said, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. "That's what's best for Clara." "Is it?" Tess asked softly, her eyes meeting his. "Last night, when I thought I might lose you, I realized something. Clara needs more than just safety and security. She needs love, stability, a father figure who will teach her about honor and courage and doing what's right even when it's difficult." She took a deep breath. "She needs you, Tucker, and so do I." Tucker's heart seemed to stop in his chest. "Tess, I know it's fast," she rushed on. "I know we've only known each other a week and that the circumstances have been extraordinary. I know I'm asking a lot, bringing a child into the equation, and this cabin." She gestured at the destruction around them. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door. But if there's any chance you might feel the same." Tucker was on his feet in an instant, crossing to her in 2 strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "I love you," he said simply. "Both of you. The thought of you leaving has been tearing me apart." He smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his usually serious face. Stay with me. We'll rebuild the cabin, expand the ranch. I'll be a father to Clara, love her as my own." Tears spilled down Tess's cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Tucker's lips found hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, tender yet passionate, a declaration and a vow rolled into one. Clara, caught between them, gurgled happily, her tiny hand patting Tucker's cheek as if offering her own blessing. When they finally drew apart, breathless and smiling, Tucker's expression grew serious once more. "There's one condition," he said. Tess raised an eyebrow, suddenly wary. "What's that?" "Marry me," Tucker said simply. "Not because it's expected or proper, but because I want to stand up in front of God and everyone in Platteville and promise to love and protect you and Clara for the rest of my days." Tess's answer was another kiss, this one so full of joy and certainty that no words were necessary. When she finally drew back, she was laughing through her tears. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she confessed. "After William, after everything, I thought that part of my life was over." "It's just beginning," Tucker promised, his arm secure around her waist, Clara nestled between them. "For all of us." Sheriff Parker arrived mid-morning, as promised, bringing with him the undertaker from Platteville to collect the bodies from the barn. If he was surprised by the changed relationship between Tucker and Tess, he didn't show it, merely nodding approvingly when Tucker announced their intention to marry. "About time you settled down, Tucker," the sheriff remarked with a twinkle in his eye. "Town's been placing bets for years on what kind of woman it would take to thaw that frozen heart of yours." Tucker felt his cheeks warm but couldn't suppress a smile. "Took the right one, I guess." Their statements were straightforward, a simple account of Reeves and his men breaking into the cabin, the subsequent gunfight, and the sheriff's timely arrival. Parker seemed satisfied, particularly when Tucker pointed out that Reeves had fired first and had clearly stated his intention to harm Tess and Clara. "Far as I'm concerned, this was a clear case of self-defense," Parker declared, closing his notebook. "I'll forward my report to the marshal's office, but I don't anticipate any issues. Reeves had a bounty on his head anyway, might even be a reward coming your way." After the sheriff and undertaker departed with the bodies, Tucker and Tess set about assessing the damage to the cabin more thoroughly. Much of the furniture would need to be replaced, and several of the wall boards would have to be repaired where bullets had torn through them. "It's going to take a lot of work," Tess observed, surveying the destruction with a practical eye. Tucker slipped an arm around her waist. "Good thing I've got help now." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Tucker set about repairing the cabin, with Tess offering suggestions for improvements along the way: larger windows to let in more light, built-in shelves for her sewing supplies, a proper crib for Clara. They worked side by side, planning and building not just a repaired cabin but a home for their future together. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Platteville, and Tucker was surprised by the outpouring of support from townsfolk he had barely spoken to in his years of solitude. Women arrived bearing home-cooked meals and baby clothes for Clara. Men offered assistance with the heavy repairs, turning what would have been weeks of solitary work into days of communal effort. Through it all, Tucker watched Tess bloom like a flower turning toward the sun. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes when she first arrived gradually gave way to a quiet confidence and joy. She made friends among the women of Platteville, particularly Sarah Jensen, the young wife of the general store owner, who became a frequent visitor to the ranch. Clara, too, thrived under their joint care. She began sitting up on her own, reaching for objects with increasing coordination, and regarding Tucker with a beaming smile whenever he entered a room. The first time she reached for him instead of Tess when upset, Tucker felt a surge of pride and protectiveness that overwhelmed him completely. She knows you're her father now, Tess observed softly, watching as Tucker comforted the fussing infant, his large hands gentle as they cradled her small form. Tucker looked up, startled. "You think so?" "I know so," Tess replied with conviction. "Children sense these things. She feels safe with you, loved by you. The rest is just details." As winter gradually gave way to the first tentative signs of spring, preparations for the wedding intensified. Tess, with Sarah Jensen's help, worked on a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored cotton, embellished with lace that Sarah's mother had sent from back east. Tucker, for his part, invested in a new suit, his first since coming to Colorado, and spent long hours with Reverend Collins discussing the ceremony and, more importantly, his responsibilities as a husband and father. "It's a sacred trust, son," the Reverend told him gravely, "particularly taking on another man's child as your own. But I've seen the way you look at that little girl and her mother. The good Lord has blessed you with a ready-made family, and I've no doubt you're up to the task." The wedding took place on the first truly warm day of spring, with wildflowers dotting the meadow beside the newly repaired cabin. It seemed the entire population of Platteville turned out for the occasion, bringing food and gifts and good wishes for the couple many had previously known only in passing. As Tucker stood beneath an arch of twisted willow branches, waiting for his bride, he could scarcely believe the turn his life had taken. Just months ago, he had been a solitary figure, content in his isolation, convinced that the capacity for deep connection had been burned out of him by war and loss. Now he stood on the threshold of a new life, his heart full to bursting with love for the woman who had appeared on his doorstep in the cold dawn, and the child who had unwittingly brought them together. When Tess appeared, Clara in her arms, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. She wore her cream dress with a crown of spring flowers in her hair, and her eyes never left Tucker's as she walked toward him, a smile of such pure happiness on her face that it took his breath away. The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. Tucker and Tess exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not just of fidelity and support, but of partnership, of shared dreams, of a family built on love and respect. When Tucker recited his vows to Clara as well, promising to love and protect her, to guide her and support her, to be the father she deserved, there wasn't a dry eye among the witnesses. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Collins proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife and family." He smiled broadly. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Ingram." Tucker did so with enthusiasm, to the cheers and applause of their guests. Clara, caught between them, patted their faces with delighted hands, as if offering her own blessing on the union. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing, food and laughter filling the spring air. Tucker, who had never been one for socializing, found himself surprisingly at ease among the townsfolk who had become, almost without his noticing, his community. As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the land, Tucker found Tess sitting on the porch steps, Clara sleeping peacefully in her arms. He settled beside her, his arm automatically finding its place around her shoulders. "Happy Mrs. Ingram?" he asked, still marveling at the sound of her new name. Tess leaned into him, her head fitting perfectly into the crook of his shoulder. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied softly. "You've given us a home, Tucker, safety, family." Tucker pressed a kiss to her temple. "You've given me far more," he confessed. "A reason to wake up each morning, a future to look forward to, love." He touched Clara's cheek gently. "Both of you have." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. The sounds of the continuing celebration drifted from the meadow: laughter, music, the simple joy of community. "You remember what you said to Clara that first morning?" Tess asked suddenly. "When you were warming her against your chest." Tucker smiled at the memory. "That we keep each other warm," he recalled. "That's what folks do out here to survive." Tess turned to face him, her expression serious despite the happiness that radiated from her. "That's what you've done for us, Tucker. You kept us warm when the world had turned cold. You gave us shelter when we had nowhere to go. You loved us when we needed it most." Tucker cupped her face in his hand, thumb brushing away the tear that spilled down her cheek. "And you brought life to a man who was just going through the motions," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You and Clara, you're my heart now. My home." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together: the joys and sorrows they would share, the family they would build, the love that had sparked in the most desperate of circumstances and grown into something enduring and true. As twilight deepened into night, the newlyweds carried their sleeping daughter into the cabin that had become a home, closing the door on the celebration outside and stepping into the first night of their life together, a life born in the cold dawn of winter, but blooming now in the warm promise of spring. 5 years later, Tucker stood on the porch of the expanded farmhouse, no longer a cabin but a proper home with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen where Tess created remarkable meals, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides, offering views of the mountains to the west and the expanding ranch to the east. The sounds of children's laughter drew his attention to the yard, where Clara, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's golden hair and what Tucker liked to think was his own determined chin, was teaching her 3-year-old brother, Samuel, how to pet the new litter of kittens that had been born in the barn last week. "Gentle Sammy," Clara instructed with all the authority a 5-year-old could muster. "Like Mama showed us." Tucker smiled as he watched his son's chubby hand tentatively stroke the kitten's fur. Samuel, named for Tucker's father, had his mother's gentle nature, but Tucker's dark hair and eyes, a perfect blend of them both. The pride Tucker felt watching his children was a constant surprise, a fierce, protective love that sometimes overwhelmed him with its intensity. The screen door opened behind him, and Tess emerged, her figure slightly rounded with their 3rd child, due to arrive in the fall. She slipped her arm around Tucker's waist, following his gaze to their children in the yard. "They want to keep all the kittens," she informed him with an amused smile. "I told them we'd have to discuss it with you," Tucker chuckled. "Of course they do." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Tess replied, leaning into his embrace. "The morning sickness seems to be easing finally." She patted her slightly rounded belly. "This one's calmer than Samuel was, more like Clara." "God help us if we have another one as headstrong as Clara," Tucker said with a laugh, though his eyes shone with pride as he watched his daughter patiently demonstrating to Samuel how to hold the kitten properly. The past 5 years had brought changes Tucker could never have imagined when Tess and Clara had first arrived on his doorstep that cold winter morning. The ranch had prospered beyond his expectations, expanding to include not just horses and cattle but crops as well, with 3 hired hands now assisting with the work. Tucker had even been persuaded to serve on the town council in Platteville, where his practical nature and fair-mindedness had quickly earned him the respect of his peers. Tess, too, had flourished. Her small dressmaking business, started initially as a way to contribute to the household income, had grown to the point where women from as far as Denver occasionally commissioned her work. She balanced her sewing with motherhood and running the household with a grace that never ceased to amaze Tucker. But the greatest joy had been watching Clara grow from the tiny, vulnerable infant he had held against his chest that first morning into a bright, curious child who called him Papa with complete and unquestioning love. Tucker had formally adopted her on her 3rd birthday, though in his heart, she had been his daughter from the moment he had wrapped her in his shirt and promised to keep her warm. "I was thinking," Tess said, interrupting his reflections, "about how different our lives might have been if I hadn't found your cabin that day, if I had gone in another direction, or if you hadn't been home." Tucker tightened his arm around her waist. "Best not to dwell on what might have been," he advised gently. "What matters is what is." Tess smiled, turning in his embrace to face him. "And what is Thomas Ingram is pretty wonderful." She rose on tiptoes to press a kiss to his lips. "I love you, you know, more every day." Tucker returned the kiss, his heart full to bursting with gratitude for this woman who had brought such joy into his life. "I love you too, Tess. You and those children are everything to me." A shriek of laughter from the yard drew their attention back to Clara and Samuel. The kitten had apparently decided that Samuel's lap was a comfortable place for a nap, and the little boy was beside himself with delight, his small face alight with wonder. "Papa, look," he called, catching sight of his parents on the porch. "Kitty likes me." "I see that, son," Tucker called back with a smile. "You're doing a fine job." Clara beamed with pride at her brother's success, then looked up at her parents with an expression that Tucker recognized all too well, the one that preceded a carefully considered request. "Can we keep just one kitten, Papa? Please. We'll take very good care of it." Tucker pretended to consider the question seriously, though he had already decided to let the children keep one of the kittens. "Well now, that's a big responsibility. A kitten needs feeding and care and someone to love it." "We can do that," Clara assured him earnestly. "We'll love it so much. We keep warm," Samuel added, echoing the phrase he had heard his father use countless times, a family motto of sorts that had evolved from that first desperate morning. Tucker felt Tess squeeze his hand, and he knew she was remembering too the cold dawn, the desperate young mother, the tiny baby who had brought them together. "Yes, son," Tucker agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "We keep each other warm, that's what family does." He glanced at Tess, finding in her eyes the same love and wonder that filled his own heart. "And we're a family." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long golden shadows across the land they had built together, Tucker Ingram stood with his wife on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard, feeling the movement of their 3rd child beneath Tess's hand, and knew with absolute certainty that this love, this family, this life was what he had been searching for all along. From the darkest, coldest dawn had come the warmest, brightest day. And for that, Tucker would be forever grateful.